Today's speaker, a Jefferson, Iowa native, is currently serving as the adjutant of the American Legion Post 250 here in Castleton. She enlisted in the Army right out of high school in 1996 and trained as a Russian linguist at the Defense Foreign Language Center in Monterey, California. In 1997, she moved across the country where she attended and graduated from the United States Military Academy Prep School at Fort Monmouth, New Jersey. She then entered the Military Academy at West Point and was part of the class of 2003. As a cadet, she participated in the Academy Exchange, where she, as the only female, spent the summer of 2001 at the Churchik Tank Academy in Uzbekistan, learning Soviet tactics, Soviet-style weapons, and small arms, working with Uzbek leadership to see the benefits of having women in their military. In 2002, she received a medical discharge from the military and found a position at West Point, where she spent the next year working with leadership of the Academy on the Commission for Congressional Investigation to identify and find better solutions for handling the crimes against women. After her time in the service, she worked as a facility security officer for a company that provided linguists to government contracts all over the world. It was at this time she was called into the ministry. She started her seminary education at Claremont School of Theology in California and finished her Master's of Divinity at the University of Dubuque Theological Seminary in 2015, where she met her loving husband, Dwayne. She has since served in a pastoral role in a number of churches, mostly in northwest and central Iowa. She has 5 brothers, all of them are Army veterans. Her father is an Army veteran, and her mother's father is an Army veteran, who, by the way, served in the Color Guard during the World War II surrender of the Japanese on the USS Missouri. She currently enjoys spending time with her children, raising future leaders of this great nation, writing, working with the American Legion, and volunteering at Castleton First Presbyterian Church, where her husband is a pastor. Please welcome today Chris Mullen.
I really want to thank you for inviting me here today for this Memorial Day service. I'm really very, very humbled to be here. As a child, it always seemed I was dragged to multiple services where I watched old men standing there telling me about people who had died so long ago. While I nodded and was somber, I didn't think it was ever something I would need to fully understand, other than I was glad it wasn't my family. I grew up in a world that didn't know war. I enlisted in a peacetime army. I remember when I joined the Army, I laughed at my Navy counterparts, thinking, why would you want to go and be deployed for 6 months at a time? I thought it would be a great way to get an education that I couldn't otherwise afford. I even got to travel to Uzbekistan in 2001 to learn the Soviet tactics at an all-military academy established by Stalin. For me, the military was a way for me to see the world, gain experiences my high school classmates would only see in movies, and to learn about so many other cultures. And while I knew war was always a possibility, it seemed so ridiculous to me at the time. And then, less than 2 weeks after I committed myself to serving 5 years as an officer after graduation, the date everyone now knows, September 11th, 2001, would make this world become a very different place. That morning started no different than any other morning. I spent my first hour class happily joking with my classmates about our previous summers. I left my engineering class from the basement of a building overlooking the Hudson, and I then proceeded to my advanced writing class. As I was walking, I began to hear mutterings of people telling everyone we needed to watch the news. I rushed to my class and stood in the doorway for a moment in horror as the TV showed a smoking building on the New York City skyline. I slowly slid into my seat, filled with shock. I then watched as the second plane hit the second tower. That was when my instructor entered the room. The stoic colonel, who I'd never seen flinch once from his course outline, came in and addressed us. He said to us, "I had an entire lesson plan prepared for you, but I don't think anything that I teach you will impact your lives more today than watching the events unfold before us. Our world is different, and your lives have changed. This is going to impact your lives forever." When our class period officially ended, I returned to my room terrified. New York City was not that far from us. I also couldn't fail to notice an increased number of military police patrolling near our barracks. While cadets feared for their loved ones, we could literally see the smoke on the horizon. We prepared for lunch with trepidation. We were also informed that West Point was the fourth highest target on the East Coast, and a coordinated attack on the cadet mess at that formation would eliminate 4,000 future armed officers. Classes were not canceled that day. Our lives and futures, now severely in danger, needed to proceed for the defense of the world. That day I saw so many young lives who had previously committed to a military of peace suddenly be filled with a sense of patriotism that could not be tarnished. I also heard from my older brother, who had just graduated and reported to his first duty station. Chuck was going to be one of the first to be sent to find the people responsible. While I never saw combat, nearly all of my classmates and all of my brothers have. The horrors they have faced are unimaginable to most. The words that my English professor spoke to us that day were true. 2 of the people sitting in that classroom of 20 eager students lost their lives seeking justice for the events of that day. Even more of my classmates have returned wounded, some with injuries that are not easily visible. Before my brother Chuck was going to deploy, I was able to secure a pass to see him off. Accompanied by my brother John, who was a year behind me at West Point, we broke the speed limit trying to get to Fort Drum before my brother got on a plane taking him to an airfield in Uzbekistan. I'm still very thankful for that New York State trooper who pulled us over, and after asking us why we were speeding, not only did he let us go, he radioed ahead so that we would be safe to continue without fear of being pulled over again. But we didn't make it in time. We got there about 15 minutes after they had left. I picked up my brother's fiancée at the time, who later became his wife, and she handed me a tiny Post-it note that had been folded carefully and had a message written on the inside. She said he'd asked her to give it to me. It was a tiny will he had written that day. War was suddenly very real to me. That very first deployment was very hard on my mother. My brother, being a forward observer attached to an infantry unit, found himself in the heart of the fighting in Afghanistan. Thanksgiving that year, he used a satellite phone to call my mother and let her know that he was pinned down in a cave and they had artillery dropping on them. He was scared, and his only thought was, "I need to call my mother." He made it home from that deployment, and he still likes to point out that he had a very different experience in Uzbekistan than I did in 2001. But he went on to do more deployments, and so did my other brothers. At one point, 3 of my brothers were deployed at the same time. And then my neighbor's son joined the Marines. My mother, who by this point had endured about 4 deployments of her sons, and had 2 sons deployed at the time, would often meet up with her and offer encouragement to my neighbors as they worried for their own son. I remember the day it happened. Somehow you always recognize the vehicles as they come near the house to deliver the news of loss. We had a moment where there was a sigh of relief as they turned away from our own home. But then panic set in with the realization of what it meant. Ben Carmen, the little boy I'd watched growing up tagging along behind his older siblings my age, lost his life in combat in Fallujah, Iraq. My mom was among the first to rush to be with my neighbors. She cried with them. We also received word that day that my brother Chuck would be returning from his second tour in Afghanistan, and Ben's body was on the same flight. Ben had always looked up to my brother, and his excitement over coming home was muted on that flight. My mom ended up enduring 4 of my brothers through 12 deployments. Then, my brother Michael, the only one to not deploy yet, and the gentlest of all of my brothers, received orders to deploy. He was mechanized infantry, and my mother knew he would find himself in worse positions than my older brother ever did. The deployment was different for her than any other before it. Somehow she knew that when he got on that plane, she would never see him again. And August 15, 2011, my brother Michael found himself in one of the worst firefights imaginable. When it was all over, he was given a Red Cross message that my mother had died. Deployment 12+1 was too much on her heart. No mother should need to suffer that many deployments. My brother ended up being brought home for 2 weeks, but after many delays and even a senator getting involved, he missed the funeral service, though he was able to be there for the committal. When my grandfathers and my father served in war, there was a draft, and every family felt the fear of deployments. When my brothers and I joined the military, there was no draft. It was an all-volunteer military. The military was stronger, better prepared. People were there to answer a deeper call to service, essentially writing a blank check to the government, up to or including my life. And while the military was better for it, it didn't have the same investment for the rest of society. My father, who was pastoring churches, would always ask for prayers for those who were deployed, and was actually told by a parishioner, "Please stop asking for prayers for our soldiers. It is far away and it seems to only affect your family." The truth of the matter is, fewer and fewer families are joining the military, relying on the same families to carry the burden. My brothers ended up serving a combined total of 15 deployments. One of my brothers has a traumatic brain injury from being blown up by an IED. All of my brothers have at least some hearing loss, and all 6 of us suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder. My story is not unique. On this Memorial Day, there are speakers sharing similar stories across this great country. We come together to remember people like my neighbor, Ben Carmen. We come together to thank all of the Gold Star families who supported their sons and daughters going to defend our country against all enemies, foreign and domestic. When politicians debate the cost of veterans' benefits, we should remember the price already paid, not just by fallen heroes, but by veterans and family members like Ben Carmen's family, because it is the true cost of war. The men and women who died for our freedom represent the diverse patchwork that is the United States of America. They were rich and poor, black and white, male and female. They were from cities, farms, and suburbs. They came from every ethnicity, background, and political spectrum. In short, they looked like any one of us. The one common characteristic that they all had was they took an oath to die for America if called upon. Later, the list of those from this community who served and have died will be read. Truly reflect on each name as it is read. Young people, I was once in your shoes. It seems so boring to hear those names, but know that they were someone's children. They were someone's friend, and their sacrifice was made for our freedom. Together, we can ensure that the memories of these heroes and their sacrifices are not in vain. We can ensure that future generations understand the importance of service, sacrifice, and honor. We can ensure through our own community service that our country remains strong, free, and prosperous. As we gather here today, we are reminded of the words of President Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. It is for us, the living, rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here thus so far nobly advanced. Today, we are the living, and we are dedicated to continuing the work of those who have gone before us. We are dedicated to preserving the memory of our fallen heroes and declare our unending gratitude and support for their families. So let us take this time to remember and honor men and women who have given their lives for this great country. Let us reflect on their courage, their sacrifice, and their dedication to a cause greater than themselves. And let us recommit ourselves to the cause of freedom, justice, and democracy, so that the legacy of our fallen heroes will live on for generations to come. We continue to mourn their loss, but most of all, we celebrate the lives that they lived. John 15:13 says it best. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. Thank you to all the mothers and fathers who have endured the deployments of your children. Thank you to all who have served and been willing to make that sacrifice. Thank you to all who have in some way supported a service member during a deployment. Thank you to all who have supported our military at any point, even in the smallest way. Thank you for allowing me to be here to share my story with you, but especially thank you to those who made the ultimate sacrifice for our freedom. God bless America.